Have you ever wondered what it would be like to be famous? Buckle on up as you are about to learn about the fame game and perhaps how to earn your own 15 minutes of fame from the manager and publicist to the mega famous.
Welcome to the Motivation Show podcast, and get ready to be inspired, motivated, and achieve massive success. And now, your host, the mayor of motivation, Eli Marcus.
Our guest today has earned global recognition as a highly regarded entertainment manager, brand consultant, and publicist who has represented Richard Pryor, Bette Midler, Paul McCartney, the Bee Gees, Muhammad Ali, Caitlyn Jenner, Quincy Jones, Vanessa Williams, the Commodores with Lionel Richie, the Jacksons with Michael Jackson, and a whole lot more A-listers. He is the author of the book, The Fame Game, an insider's playbook for earning your 15 minutes. Welcome to the Motivation Show, Ramon Hervey.
Thank you so much, Eli. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and look forward to speaking to you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, because fame is something I think almost every human being has thought of in one way or another. You know, a lot of people, if not the majority of people, probably want to be famous. There are others, like my wife, she has no interest whatsoever in being famous. So you got all types. What I was very curious, you know, you have been around and worked with a lot of very famous people. And in your great book, you say that over 4 decades, you have invested your professional career and livelihood in playing the fame game. Why do you call it a game? And why do you choose that word for part of your book title?
Well, you know, I was trying to decide how, your background is in motivation and whatever. And I needed to find a motivation. And, you know, people have been telling me for years, you should write a book, you know, you have great stories. And I didn't want to do a memoir, find sort of a pocket for what could I really contribute that could be educational, informative, enlightening, that I could talk about my clients and not do like a scandalous, the book is not about, everyone's weaknesses, but to focus on the strengths and the strategies that go into any game. Is no one knows for sure. And that's the thing about fame. There is no shortcut way to become famous. And that's one thing that I learned over 40 years, is that fame is it's not a destination, it's an accolade, and it usually comes as a output of being successful. And so to me, I thought, well, you know, every time when I have thought about fame, you put together a plan, a strategy. And, you know, every sport, I was an athlete, you know, I played football, baseball, and there is no guarantee. There's no guarantee to any game. And that's what makes it kind of interesting. And for me, as coming from behind the scenes, was to really, you know, there's so many failures in our business, but there are victories, and it's hard to sustain it because fame is also fleeting. So to me, that's the game part of it, is that it is unpredictable. And no matter how great you are, how famous you are, whether you're The Rock, who's been the most famous entertainer in the world for over 3 years, I think going on 4 years, he's had failures. Everyone has failures. So the question is, you do your best to play the game, and you hope to win, but it's not guaranteed. So that's the game part of it. And just that, and, you know, I did a little research, or a lot of research, just on the approach to fame. There's a mathematician named Samuel Orbison, and he's also an author and a scientist. And he came up with a formula for what percentage of people in the world actually are considered famous. And he did a formula by over 7 billion people in the world. And through Wikipedia, you know, they have very to get a Wikipedia page, you have to reach a certain amount of popularity, and they judge you by that. It's by the amount of media coverage you get and everything like that. So he divided that by the 7 billion, over 7 billion. It's 0.0065 people in the world are famous. So that's less than 1% of the people in the world do become fame. So that just kind of explains to you how difficult it is. But there's also a lot of very successful people in the world who never become famous. And I believe in, one of the things that, fame and success don't come with a warranty. And that if you strive to be successful, you can have a great deal of happiness enjoying your life and not ever become famous.
A lot of people think that it takes a lot of luck to be famous. And that brings me to a famous quote by Branch Rickey, who actually helped break the color line in baseball, was the, of course, the guy who ran the Brooklyn Dodgers and brought Jackie Robinson into baseball. And he said that luck is a residue of design. So I find that most famous people are incredibly talented. I'm sure they've had some luck along the way, but I don't think luck was a thing that defined their success. I think that their, greatness defined their success, and the luck just happened to find a way to them. There's a thing about people who are really good at what they do and follow all the rules, and then the luck seems to find their way, kind of like the law of attraction. What do you think about that?
I think luck is part of every game. There is a certain amount of luck involved in what I do as a manager, as a publicist, whatever. A lot of it is timing. I think timing is luck, is a form of luck. So depending on when you release a product, if something happens, spontaneously at the same time that makes your product more valuable or more exploitable, that's luck. That's something that you couldn't have planned for. So I do think that luck does play a role in strategizing and planning for potential success of a record or an album, or for example, one of the biggest, when Starbucks first started releasing albums, they created pretty much an independent distribution system for selling records in their stores. And their first big record was Ray Charles. And it was a record that they didn't know it was going to be big or not. But Ray Charles died while they had released the record, and that put the record through the roof. And it became a multi-million platinum record because of that death. Now, whether you call that luck or not, but that would be perceived as luck, for him to pass away at a time where they're introducing a whole new platform of distribution, and it really skyrocketed. And if you look at their history, they're not in records anymore, but it jettisoned their whole business portfolio in terms of opening up, and tons of big artists ended up trying to release records through Starbucks because of the Ray Charles record. And it led to the movie that happened on him, Ray, that Jamie Foxx ended up starring in. So it really made his legacy so much bigger than it might have been otherwise.
That's a fascinating story for sure. So, Ramon, famous people are idolized, they're immortalized. It's a very intoxicating reason for people to pursue fame. How do you feel about fame in general? Do you feel that the pursuit of fame is mostly a positive goal?
No, I don't think it's necessarily a positive goal, but I think that it really depends on your philosophical approach of what you think fame is. And the problem is that most people don't know what fame is until they've already become famous. There's no school that you can go to learn to become famous. And by the time you become famous, you're not really even sure if this is what you wanted. And you find that a lot of stars do change their mind about what they thought fame was going to be, or they find different ways to manage it and to integrate it into their regular life. A lot of people don't like all the baggage that comes with being famous. The lack of privacy, the fact that you're being judged by everything and anything that you do, particularly now with the advent of social media since 2013, mass consumption of social media. So I think fame has really changed the perception of fame, how you get it, how you sustain it, how it influences your life, has really morphed into a whole different experience, or since the emergence of mainstream social media. When you look at, fame's been around for a long, long time. Historically, it goes back to Egypt and church making people famous, to get them to be committed to them. It started with religion and gods, and everything was to make people feel a level elevated more than the common person. So it has been around for a long time, but I think in my time on this planet, it has definitely changed dramatically over the last 10 years.
Well, I think, when you look at an example like Princess Diana, who unfortunately had the paparazzi chasing her, and it led to unfortunately, her tragic death. There is, sometimes a heavy price for fame. And certainly one of the world famous people that you represented, Richard Pryor, certainly achieved as high a level of success as you can possibly achieve as a comedian. Yet, unfortunately, he had his demons. And at the height of his fame, there was a attempted suicide. And so can you elaborate on that famous incident which almost killed him, that he later confessed to as a suicide attempt?
Well, I worked with Richard a couple of different times. So the first time that I worked with him, he, I mentioned in the book, I was a conciliatory person. I think that I ended up, managing all of his missteps, and he needed someone to sort of protect him from the media, as opposed to, as a young guy, I was a vice president at Rogers & Cowan, a major PR company at the time, and he was probably the number one Black entertainer in the world at that time. And he picked me. His manager called and said he wanted me to represent him, and they wanted to make sure that I was the guy that was going to represent him. And I was over the moon happy with this.
And why you? Yeah, how did they? Of all the people on the planet.
By the time that Richard came into my life, I had earned my way a little bit. I had a pretty good reputation going for me. I've been very fortunate. I'd already worked with Bette Midler. I'd worked with Paul McCartney. I'd worked with a lot of people. And so he came to me at a time when I was really, very close to the top of my game. And I got very excited because I thought there was so much that I could do for him, and when I finally got next to him and learned his habitual habits and his downfalls and whatever, I realized that your perception of what you think you can. It's, first of all, fame is it's that person. You don't, whatever your role is, whether you're a manager, agent, or whatever, you're just a conduit to help service. I'm in the service industry in all the capacities that you mentioned earlier. Whether I'm a consultant, a publicist, or a manager, I'm performing a service. I get paid to help them do whatever it is that they want to do. So it's not my fame, it's really their fame. And their fame, everyone's going to have a different perception of what their fame is. And Richard, I think, always felt guilty about his fame and had a hard time adjusting to the fact that he was treated special, and he didn't think that he could live up to the level of fame that he had achieved. I think it was always and I think that created an albatross around his neck, and that maybe made him rely on more substance to sedate and calm himself. And so he had drug and alcohol problems. By the time that the suicide thing had come, I just think that he had, reached the point where he didn't want to be that person anymore. And at the very moment when he did that, I wasn't representing him. But then he brought me back, and he did a film called Jojo Dancer, Life is Calling, which was his first directorial position. He directed his own, bio film. And in that film, that's when he did finally admit after the fact that he did try to commit suicide. For the longest time, he said he didn't. He said it was an accident. But one of the things about Richard Pryor that I thought is very unique, and I've never met any other famous person, usually when you have a crisis where your persona is being compromised or marginalized by something that you did. It could be something that you self-inflicted. It could be something that an accident happened, whatever it is, he found a way to always market his vulnerability. And he never lost his audience no matter what he did. They always ingratiated and loved him and showed him, no matter how self-destructive he was. And he did it by a concert film. He did it by recording albums. All of his comedy focused on all of his missteps. And it was, if you really look at his history, all of the, he did maybe 4 films. I was the one that helped create the very first Richard Pryor live in concert film. And in that film, he had just, about a month before that, he had shot the tires off his wife and him had a major row, and she was trying to leave their house. And he shot the tires, all 4 tires on a Mercedes. And he goes, well, you're not going to leave in that car. And then he put that in his comedy. And he did this on a cycle all the time, if you look at his history. And that I always marveled at that he was able to find a way to, usually in my role as a crisis manager, whatever, you would tell celebrities to walk away from it, put closure, put it behind you. Don't feed it to the media. And give them something else to write about you, so that you can move on with your life. But he did it the exact opposite. And it was very successful for him.
Yeah, he kind of broke the mold, right? And he used that for the fodder for the mill, as they say.
Yeah, and I've never seen it repeated. I don't know anyone else who was as successful as him in marketing, all of the things that he did wrong.
Well, what's interesting is in order to get, I guess, to the height of fame, you have to have, I assume, a pretty healthy ego. If you don't have that healthy ego, then you may suffer for that, from, I guess, what you're alluding to. Richard may have suffered from like somewhat of an imposter syndrome, where you feel like, do I really deserve all these accolades and all this level of success, that I've gotten? And, then you struggle, like, how do I handle this? And then you turn it over to drugs or something else as a defense mechanism to escape, which is, very, very interesting. And so I assume you've met some people with some really strong egos and personalities who actually did believe in their own hype, right?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword. I do believe that you have to have a big ego and you have to have a huge amount of self-confidence to be successful in entertainment. But at the same time, and what I tried to express in the book is a humanity aspect that fame is, to me, is it's like an emotional response to how people are responding to you. And so, but your famous people are no different than regular people. Famous people bleed, they cry, they laugh, they have families, they have regular work hours, particularly if you do Broadway, they go to work, they have to come home, they have to find balance in their lives. But when you add fame into it, different people take that in different directions. Some people think that fame entitles them to be treated more special than other people. And when you start to believe the hype, then it can really, create an imbalance in your psychological belief of who you are. You lose a sense of yourself. And that's why I think a lot of people, just like alcohol or anything else, any kind of thing that emotionally causes imbalance in your psyche can be dangerous. And it's not everybody can deal with it the same way. So some people can enjoy and appreciate their fame, and other people, it can become very self-destructive because once they lose it, they don't know how to live. They're not able to manage their life without it. And that's every famous person I ever met, they had a different path to get it. And they all lost some level of fame at some point. I don't know any person, whether it's Bette Midler, Quincy Jones, Muhammad Ali, all the people that I've been fortunate enough to work with, they all went through lulls in their careers where they had to reinvent or do something to try to regain the level of success that they once had. It's just natural. It's just like anyone in your own, regardless of your job, you go through ebb and flow where you can be really successful and then you hit a wall and then you have to recalibrate and what can I do to motivate myself to, I'm not really where I want to be, or this field is not what I want to do. And you see, celebrities going from one genre to another. It's just one of those things where you don't really know again until you're really in it. And if I wish there was a way that, I used to tell people, like, if there was a mechanism to make people famous, like a serum or something, or you could take a pill.
5 simple rules, right?
Yeah, 5 things that you do. That's what I would be selling, because everyone would be trying to buy it. With social media, everyone. That's given everyone an opportunity to be an entrepreneur and make them feel that they can reach fame, some level of fame. But the reality is, even with social media, only 1% of the people on social media have over 1 million followers, which is the highest level of social media strata. So it's just one of those things where it's always going to be much harder than most people realize. And then you just don't know if you're going to be suited for it. It's just the same. People get married and they realize, well, this is not for me. It's the same thing with fame. You just don't know until you're there.
Well, Ramon, you've given us some sobering statistics through Wikipedia and the odds of actually becoming famous. I was reading a book recently and it talks about famous people who, because of being famous, there were, unfortunate things that made their lives also very challenging, and it focused on John Lennon, of course, who unfortunately was shot in 1980 and killed, and then talked about Elvis and his downward spiral, with drugs, and similar story maybe to Richard Pryor, where he's just on overload and couldn't handle it all. And then it also talked about Muhammad Ali, of course, who suffered as well in the end days and throughout his life. But nevertheless, no matter what we're going to say, how the difficult the odds are, and all the people who've been challenged, there are some people who are still going to say, I want to be famous. And so you wrote this book, and you have that subtitle, An Insider's Playbook for Earning Your 15 Minutes. So why don't we get into some of the chapters in your book that at least might increase the odds of those people who are just going to go ahead and say, I still want to learn how to get my 15 minutes of fame.
I'll be happy to talk about it. The key, I think in a way, when I look back at it, maybe the title is somewhat of a misnomer, because what I tried to say is, look, it's not a how-to book, but the game is what I try to enlighten people is how I played the game and what my tasks were, the juxtaposition of where the client was when I met them, what influence that I had on them. And those are the lessons that you learn. It's not really to tell you that I don't really have the answers to, but this is a playbook that I used. This is my actual, I'm giving you the insiders. I'm trying to put you in the driver, the passenger seat to see like what I did and how I did it and whether some of it worked or some of it didn't. And that's the takeaway is, if you read and you look at, I think the exploration and the great thing about reading is you're exploring and getting people's insight. And it's not that any one author has all the answers. It's here are some thoughts that might make sense to you. And if they apply, use them. And if you think they're bullshit or whatever, don't use them. And I think that's the spirit of the way I wrote the book was I haven't set myself up to say that I have the answers or that my playbook is the only way to become famous. It's just that I think I've been very fortunate and lucky to work with a lot of people, so I have a better understanding maybe of it than some other people do.
Sure. And what other example besides Richard Pryor can you give us that you may have outlined in your book of someone that you feel that you manage very well through the ups and the downs?
I'm very proud of my relationship with Bette Midler. Bette Midler was a big supporter of mine. She really helped to blossom my career. One, because I was, I came into the business. There weren't a lot of Black people doing my job, people of color. And so to have someone of her ilk and her level of fame endorse me was really a big, and it really helped me to expand my horizons in my different roles. I was never her manager. I was her publicist, but I did work in a management capacity, even though I wasn't contract, because she didn't have a manager. And she did so many different things. She's so talented that I just got an opportunity to learn so much, because she did film, television. She was a very successful live entertainer. She recorded, she wrote books. So I got a chance to, do all those things with her. And that, part of becoming good at any skill, developing a skill set, is exposure, and just having experience in the trenches, instead of trying to make assumptions and assessments from the sidelines. So she really put me in the trenches, and I'm really proud of the thing. I got to to play a role in the Rose, the launch of that film. And she did her first big. I worked on all of her first 3 big television specials I was involved with. So it was, to be able to work with a client who's multifaceted was a really big opportunity for me with Bette. And we're still friends, and I just really have a great appreciation and fondness of her. And then my ex-wife, Vanessa Williams, I also think, I came to her at a time of need as a publicist first, originally, when she ran into the whole mayhem with the pictures in Penthouse magazine, and having to deal with being asked to resign as Miss America. And the thing about that story is, historically, the record is that she was forced to resign, and that's not true. She was asked to resign because they were afraid of whether they had the legal right to force her to resign. That's why they gave her the option. And when I came in, the option was, you have 72 hours to let us know what you're going to do. Are you going to resign or whatever? Because their pageant, which is what drives the Miss America pageant every September, they have that pageant. It's a national. All their sponsors are geared towards supporting that broadcast, and that's what keeps that whole system going for the 60 year. At that time, she was the first Black Miss America, so it was already 60 years in that they had developed a system around the pageant and that broadcast, and they didn't want anything to ruin that broadcast. And I didn't think that they would let her be on the broadcast no matter what. So I was brought in to, what are we going to do? I didn't know her. I had never met her. I met a guy that was acting as her manager at the time, and he asked for my input. And I handled the press conference. I set up the press conference within 72 hours for her to make a decision without knowing what that decision was. Then the lawyers got involved, and it was a huge thing for me to undertake. And I lived in LA at the time. I didn't realize that it was such a big deal in New York, because she was Miss New York. And, when I got the morning that I met her, I flew in on the red eye after having set up the press conference for a Monday morning that would start at the very end of the 72 hours. And I told the guy, we're going to do one announcement, we're going to announce to the world, and the Miss America pageant can watch the press conference, and they'll find out what the decision was. Even though at that time I didn't know what the decision was. And there was like an encampment of about 400 media outside of her house, going up to meet her for the very first time, and her parents. And so that was a huge thing. And then, we ended up, I ended up becoming, she did resign, and I was happy about that. I ended up, we became friends, we became lovers, we got married, we have 3 kids together. I ended up being her manager. So that, I look at that as, taking something that was like in a really bad position, because I don't come from that school that any publicity is good publicity. And she really paid her dues in terms of the negativity that whole escapade brought into her life. It took almost a decade for her to actually be in a position where she could actually use her own name, because she did a show on Broadway, Kiss of the Spider Woman. Yep. And up until that time, there was never a media article that ran that didn't say Vanessa Williams, former Miss America, nude pictures, blah, blah, blah. There was always like that tagline. And David Rich, who was a New York Times Broadway critic, he wrote a review of her opening night, and it was the first time that he just called her Vanessa Williams. Vanessa Williams made her Broadway debut, and he gave her a rave review. And I went, we finally reached that point where she got her life back, just so that she could be called Vanessa Williams. And, so that just to be able to be part of, a growth, and to see a talent. She's always was talented. I didn't make her talented. But to have an influence on helping a young person really, give them the seeds of success in the business I consider that something that I'm very proud of. And, she's been a great mother, and we've raised 3 beautiful kids. So that's a huge part. It's something I'm really proud of in that. So those are 2 that I'm very fond of, Vanessa and Bette.
You're like a fireman, you're putting out all these fires along the way. That's part of your job, I suppose.
It's unpredictable. People say, well, you're a crisis manager. Well, I don't look for crises. They fall in your lap, and then you just try to do the best.
You deal with them. You do the best you can. Yeah. Well, one of the interesting titles in your book, is Fame Begets Fame. The more you get, the harder it is to manage, which is like kind of what you alluded to before about, there's no playbook on fame. Once people get famous, it's just like snowballs and takes off from there. It's like, how do I deal with this all? Tell me about that chapter.
Well, the funny thing is, fame begets fame. I just think that's sort of the natural evolution and process, that once you get a little taste of fame and you can continue and sustain it, then it can lead to more fame, or you may find out that you don't want to be famous at all. But that chapter was I share or try to enlighten people a little bit about my own trajectory of my career, and a few things that were important in the very embryonic stages. After I left Motown, I went to Rogers & Cowan Public Relations, and my very first client, and the reason I got hired there is because I got an opportunity to work with Paul McCartney from the Beatles.
Not too shabby.
Not too shabby. It was a great way to start off. I didn't meet Paul initially, and what happened was my Paul Block, who was a senior VP, long-standing publicist, very well respected in the business, he told me he didn't have a job for me. I was referred to him. I got laid off by Motown. And he said, I don't have a job for you, but sometimes we use freelance writers, and I'll give you a call if something comes up. And that's how he ended up calling me up. And he said, hey, would you be interested in working on a project on Paul McCartney? I said, Paul McCartney? Of course. Yeah. What is it? And then I came in, and, he owned the Buddy Holly catalog. And so he was doing a week event of events in the UK, and he needed a press kit put together. So that was my initial task with Paul McCartney, was to put it together. and I did it, pretty quickly. It took me about 3 or 4 days to put it all together. Paul submitted it to Paul McCartney, and he said, "Hey, Paul loves your work, and he wants to use it. He wants to use it." So and as a result of that, I ended up getting a job at Rogers and Cowan, and the next 4 or 5 years of my career were really shaped during that time, and that's when I got to work with, Richard Pryor and Bette Midler, a lot of very famous people during my my residence with Rogers and Cowan, and probably the person that I really was, even after Paul McCartney, my first client that I signed as my own, because I was a day-to-day guy. Paul was really running Paul McCartney, but I did a lot of the grunt work for Paul, and he also had another publicist in New York. But I got an opportunity to work with Quincy Jones, and Quincy Jones had just written the music for The Wiz, and he was one of the so I represented the Wiz soundtrack, and that was the first client that I brought to Rogers and Cowan. And I got to meet Quincy. The first time I met him, he invited me to have lunch at his house in Bel Air, and his wife from the Mod Squad was there, and Peggy Lipton. And she opened the door, and I mean, I sat and talked to him for 2 hours, and he's such a special individual, so talented, and so gracious and warm, and so much of a mentor to me, someone that I really looked up to. And he, crisscrossed throughout my career in many ways and fashions, but mostly as a friend. And one of the things I was fascinated by his story was that he was a very successful, not famous composer for motion pictures and television. And this was when, he started in his early 20s. He was a trumpeter, and he wasn't a famous musician, but he did enough. But because he was Black, he didn't really get the kind of attention that you would, was afforded to someone like Henry Mancini. So his early 20s and 30s, you have this really successful guy who's not famous. And then when he turns 57, and from his early 30s to his 50s, he did a lot of very successful things. He had a record company. He was a vice president of a record company. Then he had his own production company. Did so many things. Still wasn't really famous. But then when he got with Michael Jackson, that was really the height of his fame.
They do We Are the World?
It was actually, We Are the World did help to set him up. And it was after We Are the World that he ended up working with Michael on Michael's own record. But We Are the World, and that was also with Harry Belafonte, who just passed away not too long, last week, who I also worked with. That was the genesis. It was Harry, it was Quincy, it was Stevie, Lionel, and Michael. And that was really the core group of people and then, Quincy got all those other artists to be a part of We Are the World. But it was just fascinating that you just don't know. One of the things that I mentioned in the book is every client I ever represented took a different path, and you never know when fame is going to come. So I always say, don't wait, don't wait on it, because it'll never show up when you want it, and I don't think Quincy expected it to have that moment in his life at 57 where he became globally one of the most famous people on the planet.
There's hope for all of us then, huh? He did it at 57.
But yeah, he's another person. We were talking about Bette Midler and Vanessa and other people, but he definitely was a huge influence on my life, professional life, and also just someone that I just treasured being in his presence, because he had so many great stories and so much insight. So I really appreciate my time with him.
So you gave some great examples of Vanessa Williams and also, of course, Richard Pryor in terms of, fame being sort of the more you get, the harder it is to manage. Any other examples like that?
Probably the worst case scenario was Rick James, who really, he had a very troubled childhood, and he worked his way to become famous. He was on the brink of really becoming famous. But for him, fame meant entitlement. And he put himself above people He created a lot of bad blood. The way that he treated people. A lot of people didn't really want him to win, at least in the industry. He always had a great fan base, but I think that his fame was toxic for him, and he self-destructed. In some ways similar to Richard Pryor, but Richard Pryor gained far more fame than Rick James did. And Rick James is just, if you look at what he had, like he was like meteoric. He came from when I worked with him, he released the album Street Songs, and he maybe had one more successful album after that. So he had like a 3 to 5 year threshold of fame, and then he lost it almost completely. And it was very sad because I know that he really wanted it. He was someone who was obsessed with fame and all the hoopla that goes with it, all the perks and everything. He loved being the king of everything, and he was very demanding, and I just think that he's a case of, if you did a case study on him, he's someone who really did not know how to manage his fame.
So in closing, what are you most proud of?
I'm proud of my reputation. I've never been sued for stealing or cheating anybody. I've always approached the business with a great deal of integrity. I've always worked really hard. I've always tried to be honest with my clients and authentic and transparent. And I think that's much better than being one of those people like a yes man. I've learned through the business, and I do mention in the book that in my earlier stages, I did things that, I wasn't ethically in line with. And then as I got older and more experienced, there was different things that I wasn't willing to compromise.
You told a good example of that in the book, actually, with Richard Pryor, when he didn't want to show up to an appearance, and you had to go with his bodyguard and actually talk to Muhammad Ali.
Yes, yeah, that was one of the worst.
You were not proud of that. You only had 5 minutes with Muhammad, but you were not proud afterwards of having to tell Richard's life.
Yeah, because I knew Muhammad Ali a little bit. I'd worked with him on a couple of projects. So having to lie to one of my heroines was not comfortable. So I think that in any business you have to my motivation is to sustain my reputation and be happy with who I am as a person in my life, where I'm not I don't want to be a slave to other people and what their desires are, no matter how famous they are or whatever. And you have to be able to walk away from situations that don't fit you, that aren't complimentary, that aren't healthy for you to be involved with. And I think that I've tried to do my best to, stay true to who I am and who I think I need to be to have a sense of sanity in my own life,
So, Ramon, the goals for the next 5-10 years, and how could people learn more about you?
Well, I have a website. I'm on social media. You can find me on Instagram or Facebook. I want to write some more. That was one of the main reasons why I did this book. I want to write more, and I'm doing less and less management per se, because I think there isn't anyone out there that I really feel like I need to manage or want to manage. So I'm just trying to, follow my own dreams. And I think, I've been a service person for over 40 years, and I'm just trying to service myself now, in the twilight of my life. And I just want to try to do things that I'm passionate about and that I believe in. I just want to continue working and being self-motivated and to accept challenges in my life that I think bring self-reward and self-fulfillment. I don't think of myself as ever retiring as long as I can. My mind is right. I just want to continue I love the entertainment business, and I love winning.
Well, I can tell you that your authenticity, your warmth, and your integrity really shines through. And I want to thank you today for being on the Motivation Show.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you.
If you would like to inquire about having Eli motivate your team, speak at your event, or coach you personally for massive success, email themotivationshow@gmail.com. That's themotivationshow@gmail.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.